Hey, Black Light, welcome back to another episode. On today's episode of Black Light Mass Incarceration Show, we shine a light on a story that reminds us as why the justice system can't depend on power and it must depend on truth. Our guest, Elisa Grant, is the wife of Rashawn Grant, a North Carolina man whose case has been tangled in the judicial neglect and political corruption involving Judge Jefferson Griffin, which a lot of you may have heard that name before. A judge accused of ignoring his duties while wrapped up in multiple lawsuits and efforts to overturn the election that he lost. But beyond the headlines, this is a love story, a story about a woman who refuses to stay silent while her husband fights for his freedom. Elisa joins us today to share their journey, the pain and the hope and the fight for accountability. So without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce Elisa. If you just kind of want to give us a background about yourself, and then we'll get into the questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I hate to correct you, but my pronunciation for my name is Elisa.
Elisa, okay.
So if you hear me say that, yeah. But Lily is just fine. That's my nickname. That's what everyone calls me. But yeah, I'm very excited to be here. I still live in North Carolina. Obviously, I'm here for the long haul since my husband is incarcerated in this state. Been here about 10 years. I'm originally from Virginia, but very blessed. I work from home. I have a great career. I'm writing a couple of books. I'm a cat mom. I'm a homebody. So I can't complain. Not too exciting, but very blessed for sure.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think it's good being a homebody. I'm a homebody as well. So, hey, don't feel bad. But Virginia's not too far. What part of Virginia?
Virginia Beach area. So I grew up in the Tidewater, and I still have family there and in DC. And then my husband's family is all in New Jersey. So.
Okay. All right. Well, so I guess let's get into this story. And thank you for being here. And how did you and Rashawn first meet?
Yeah. So, I mentioned I moved to North Carolina about 10 years ago. He also moved there around the same time. So born and raised in New Jersey. It was kind of like a fresh start for both of us. It obviously is way cheaper down here to live than in New Jersey and in parts of, Virginia, Northern Virginia. So, when you're a young adult just getting on your feet, sometimes it's easier to start over somewhere where you can actually support yourself.
Yeah.
We were both working in the restaurant scene. I was going to school. I bartended part-time. He was working in the hotels and hospitality management. He also bartended part-time. So to make a long story short, we ended up meeting at work, worked together a couple of years, strictly platonic. We were both in other relationships at that time, but we just became really great friends. He was somebody that, he draws anyone close to him. His energy is just, you feel it when he walks in the room. He commands the room. He's just so kind. And, his laugh, it's like, you got to know this guy, right? So we became really good friends.
Yeah, that's how it goes. I met my husband when we were teenagers, and we separated for a while because he was in the system, and then reconnected back in 2019. So I get it. So what was life like before all this happened? Were you with him were y'all together when this happened, or how did that happen?
So we weren't together. We were just friends. We didn't end up getting together until we reconnected after he was arrested. So the incident that happened was in 2019. COVID happened immediately after, so obviously we were not even working in the restaurant together at that time. He moved back to New Jersey to open a restaurant with a friend of his. I was still, in North Carolina, but I had switched to a career in finance. So, we just kind of grew apart, that friendship. I remember one of our mutual friends sent me the article of his arrest, and the news article was very vague. It just said that he had been arrested. There were no further details, and it was for first-degree murder. So the fact that this man was arrested at all was a shock to me. But then when you see what they were saying it was for, I'm like, this is incorrect. He would never do this. Like, this man would never hurt anybody. So I reached out to him. I found out what county jail he was at. I just wanted to help, any way that I could. I wanted to know what was going on. how I could help him. So I got involved in his case pretty early on. And we just, we were both out of our relationships at that point. It had been a little over a year since we last talked. And it just kind of grew from there. He's always been this amazing person that I was drawn to. When you don't have the physical, you have nothing but time and the emotional. So we learned each other on a deeper level. We were already very, very good friends, and it just blossomed into a beautiful relationship.
I love to hear that. So will you let us know who Rashawn was as a person, a husband, and a father if he has kids?
Yep. So, just kind of snowballing off of what I said earlier, he worked very hard for himself. Rashawn just has this amazing story, right? Like he came from very humble beginnings, and, growing up in Newark, New Jersey, family didn't have much. He moved down here to really make a life for himself. He moved some of his family down with him, was taking care of people. He ended up working up the career ladder in hospitality management at the hotels. The town that we lived in, Rocky Mount, North Carolina, they opened this big event center for, events, and he became a manager there. So he really just built this amazing career for himself. He was so loved in the community. I mean, everyone that knew him loved him. He was literally the nicest person. He would give the shirt off of his back for anybody that was in need. Just an amazing person all around. There's nothing bad you can say about him. So many people were shocked when this happened. It was like an outrage in the community. He had never been in trouble, no criminal record. You couldn't imagine that this would be something that they would accuse him of. Great father to his son. His son is 9 now, and he was 4 when Rashawn got arrested. So he's missed a good chunk of his life. But great father, very involved. And again, he took care of his family.
And sadly, this is what a lot of us face in America. Our loved ones being incarcerated, especially innocent, for a crime they didn't commit, whether they had a background or whether they didn't have a background. It is just something it seems like we all grapple with now. And that's why I made this podcast, to bring awareness that our system has been broken for years. And I think that now more and more that you see, because I watch a lot of trials online, and I think the more that you see that it's broadcasted, the more you understand how it's a gameplay and how a lot of times prosecution don't have the correct person. They just have somebody because somebody has to pay. And that's what it all boils down to. Is somebody has to pay for a crime that was committed, whether it's the right person or the wrong person, somebody's going to pay. And so it's just sad to see that so many people are technically losing their lives to the system every day, and it's just heartbreaking to me. When did you first realize something was wrong in how his case was being handled?
Well, from the second I heard that he was arrested, I knew something was wrong. But, it's like you just said, it's the domino effect, right? It starts with the police, and then it's the prosecution and the courts. And there's so many people involved. And the bigger the mistake gets and the more mistakes they add to the situation, the less likely they are to undo it because there's no accountability. So I feel like it started with the police misconduct, but we really noticed something was terribly wrong during his trial. So we were very uneducated, obviously, never been in trouble. Everyone's like, this local lawyer is great. He's the best in town. We go with that person without vetting him. Needless to say, he was extremely ineffective. He may be a great attorney, but should not be handling murder trials. He just, sold us promises that he couldn't keep and sold us a dream, I think is how the saying goes. It's like, the plea deals will get sweeter and sweeter. They have nothing on him. I can't believe they arrested him for this. He's coming home. Wouldn't let my husband take the stand at trial, which he wanted to. Wouldn't let my husband take a lie detector test, which he wanted to. We're pushing for this trial because he's innocent. We're like, let's go to trial. Let's go to trial. And I feel like, someone who's guilty, you either don't want to go to trial or you're just crazy and want to take your chances. Mm-hmm. So it's like, that attorney, there were no plea deals. And if there were any offered, he did not communicate that. He did not go visit my husband. I think he saw him twice. Once was the weekend before the trial. His wife passed away a couple of weeks before trial, which is terrible, but he did not push for a continuance. He still went to trial. So just ineffective all around. We have an email from him actually to the DA that prosecuted the case, where he says in the email, in hindsight, I should have continued this because I wasn't ready, but I'll still be there Monday. So it's like the DA just allowed that, allowed the trial to move forward. He broke down crying twice, which is understandable during my husband's trial. One of those times he had to go back to chambers with the judge, with the DA. They still allowed it to move forward. He admitted to me that he did not watch any witness interviews. He did not finish reading the discovery. This is a murder trial. And then he came up to me the morning that trial started on Monday and said he was wired up on medication because of his wife's passing. So he felt very confident and ready to go because he was wired up, which is very concerning. And then he thanked me for the notes that I sent him, my thoughts on the witness interviews, because I was very involved in the case. And he said that's what he would be using for trial because he didn't have anything else prepared.
Oh boy. So what about the private investigator? What did he do his part? Did he go and interview witnesses? Did he go back to the crime scene? Any of those things?
Unfortunately, he did not hire a private investigator. He decided to use the one that was initially appointed because, when you're first arrested, they give you a court appointed until we actually hired our own attorney. Mm-hmm. He had just reached out to him to get any notes that PI had, which really wasn't anything. We found out the morning of trial that the shell from the bullet casing that they think was what had killed the decedent was not even tested for DNA evidence. It was sent to the lab 2 months before my husband's trial, and then they came and took it back for court, and it had never been tested. So it's like nothing was done, and you try not to blame yourself for not knowing, because had we known what we know now, we would have had a private investigator do everything, right? Get things tested, interview people. This is very important, but we were trusting of that attorney, and we were frankly very uneducated.
Wow. I don't think I've never heard an incompetency trial to that effect. And the fact that the judge let an attorney continue a case when he just wasn't mentally there, he just lost his wife. It should have been continued. That is wild.
Yep. Very small town. The judge knew our attorney, who also had a lake house next to the prosecutor. We knew the judge. I didn't even think that we would be able to have my husband's trial in that county because my husband and I knew the judge. He would frequent the restaurant bar that we worked at all the time. It was just very small town vibes. People on the jury knew the judge and knew our attorney and knew everyone. It was just like everyone knows everyone.
And this is Jeff Griffin.
No. So Jefferson Griffin, this is fast forwarding to our appeal. He was the judge that was on the Court of Appeal, the 3-judge panel that handled the appeal. Whatever the main one is, I don't know if he's the one that published it or he kind of took the reins on it, but there's always one out of the 3 that publishes the opinion, and it's in their words. So that was Judge Jefferson Griffin.
Wow, that is something else. So for the listeners who don't know the details about Rashawn's case, do you feel comfortable with sharing, going into a little bit more detail about the case?
I certainly can. Yep. So we're still going through the appeals process. So, a lot of stuff can be found online. Obviously, the Court of Appeals published their opinion, which we'll get into. That was Judge Jefferson Griffin. Also started a petition online, which goes more into detail in my husband's case. It's a change.org petition. So justice for Rashawn Grant, same as all of our social medias. But essentially, there was a shootout between 2 parties, 10 plus people on scene. A bunch of the people that were involved, they're the victims in this, but they moved their cars, they moved their guns, they moved a ton of evidence immediately after the shooting before the police arrived because they were involved. They were shooting at another party across the parking lot. Essentially, the lead detective, which that whole investigation was a train wreck, and he's no longer with the police department either, Joshua Talley, but he collaborated with these convicted criminals because they have a rap sheet a mile long. They've also been in trouble even after this, strongly believe they were involved, and they know who this other party of people shooting was, but they will not be truthful. They had some type of beef with my husband's brother because he has a younger brother who he moved down here. He was dating one of those boys' younger sisters, that whole ordeal. So, I really think that they looked at this as an opportunity to try to frame my husband instead of, say what they actually know from that night. We have countless witness interviews with them where they're just giving false stories. They're talking in circles, nothing matches up. And the lead prosecutor still goes with that. He's still asking them leading questions about my husband. And it's a very sad case if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things that we are still shocked that it happened. We try to be thankful, that a lot of mistakes did happen in this because maybe that helps our chances moving forward and getting him some type of relief. But it's crazy. If you look at his Instagram, I have a Justice for Rashawn Grant Instagram. There's a video up there of these boys that were involved recording a music video. I think this was a year and a half ago. So well after my husband's conviction, flashing guns, talking about shooting people. It's crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm not surprised in North Carolina that stuff like that happens. It even happens here in Guilford County. We had a guy not too long ago who I think the Duke Innocence Law had helped him. He wasn't even in the state when they convicted him of first-degree murder, and then so they went back to court, and they still made him plead to second-degree murder. He was released, but he still had to plead to second-degree murder to get released. And I'm like, how do you make somebody who, and there's receipts that he wasn't even in the state, how do you make somebody that's not in the state plead to a murder they didn't commit? So that was a little odd to me. So I'm not surprised. North Carolina is very special when it comes to these types of things. I think that's why we have a lot of people that are incarcerated, because it's just like somebody's got to pay. It doesn't matter who it is, but somebody's got to pay. So how did Judge Griffin's behavior or decision affect the fairness of his appeal case?
So I think that everything that was going on with Judge Griffin had a huge impact on Rashawn's appeal. Because, if you think about it, the Court of Appeals, it's a high court, right? Their only job is to review these cases, and if there are mistakes from the trial court, it's to undo those mistakes. In my husband's case, they created more mistakes. There were things in his appeal opinion that were not even in evidence. It's like they just made it up and put it in there because it was a story that sounded good in their head. So, of course, we push back on that opinion and go to the North Carolina Supreme Court. They don't even look at it. It's very hard to get them to accept a PDR. So now we're going to the United States Supreme Court, and hopefully they'll look at it, But it's like when you have mistakes that are just so obvious, and the fact that these higher courts can ignore that, that's the biggest shocker to me. Right. Judge Jefferson Griffin, he's in the middle of running for, the North Carolina Supreme Court. And those elections happened early November. My husband's appeal was decided on in December, a month after he lost, in the middle of, these lawsuits between the Board of Elections, the people versus Griffin. I mean, it was publicized everywhere across the nation. So when you're focused on these lawsuits and, trying to undo an election and, he made claims that he was in danger, people were sending things to his home, he needed security, which is terrible. I'm not condoning that, but it's like, that's where your focus is. It's protecting your family, protecting yourself. And sadly, how can you overturn an election? So how can you focus on not just my husband's case, but any case that's in front of you, and let alone be the primary judge on the panel? There were two others, but why was he the one that made the decision or signed off on it? There's no way that he read, and the mistakes that just make it evident that there's no way that he read through the appeal in its entirety. My husband was awarded oral arguments, which we were hopeful about that. We had oral arguments in September. I think they went well. If anyone wants to listen, it is on YouTube because they post everything on the Court of Appeals page, and it's, the state versus Rashawn Grant. But even with oral arguments, it's like we tried to get our point across. We thought it went well, but they still ruled against us, and they added numerous things in the opinion that are not true. So
I'm not surprised. I have another friend whose husband is fighting for his case as well. And, the habeas, the MAR was denied, and then the habeas, the writ of certiorari was denied. And then they just got notice that the habeas corpus was denied. And really with no explanation on either one of why all three were denied. And the attorney that they have is, probably one of the best in North Carolina. He said he's never seen some of the things coming out of our court that he's seen, and I think that just speaks volumes of where we currently are at right now in the political landscape, especially with our courts, and how it seems like they're just so dead set on not letting people free when there's evidence of errors that have been made in a trial, in a case, in a plea deal. And that leads to my next question. Do you think that political involvement in lawsuits influenced how it was handled? Which you've kind of alluded to that, but give me a little bit more detail of, since we're in a different political landscape, and we have been for a while, how do you think politics binds together with freedom for most of our people that are incarcerated?
I think it's a very scary time that we're living in, and I think that a lot of these elected officials are seeing other people lead by example by just completely disregarding the law. So they feel that they can also disregard the law, and it's very scary because when you can, see an error plain as day and you try to come up with whatever loophole, sometimes it's not even a loophole. They're just not even giving it a second look. It's scary, not only for the people that, it's impacting, but for everyone. It's like this really opened our eyes to just how much misconduct there is. And it's almost embarrassing because before this, my husband and I would have probably been the people that just hear these stories and are like, yeah, okay. But we see how it really is and how it impacts people and families, and it's terrible. So I think, politics does play a part. Specific to, Judge Griffin, I think his situation distracted him from doing a thorough job. I also think politics in the small county of Edgecombe, where my husband went to trial and was convicted, also played a part in it. Because again, everyone knew everyone. We knew the judge. There's no way that this could even stand trial, but they did allow it to. They didn't ask questions. There was just so much misconduct from the beginning.
And that just goes to show the incompetency of the lawyer, which I don't know him, but you have a right to change a venue so that you can receive a fair trial, ensuring that, whatever, relationships or, things that happen in a small county doesn't affect you receiving a fair trial. And I've seen a lot of people ask for a change of venue so that they could have a mix of different opinions of people that really don't know them because they're not from that county, haven't really heard, to get a fair trial, so that you're getting a jury that sees everything from all angles and all eyes, and not just, oh well, I know that person, because it's hard when you're in a small county. Everybody knows everybody. That's just how it is, and so it's hard to get over that. Yep. What has been the most difficult or shocking part of this whole process?
It just goes back to the lack of accountability. It's like if we can't trust the courts and the people that are put in positions of power to protect us and to make sure that justice is actually served, like we're not in a good place at all. So I'm just very surprised. You grow up thinking like, if you're innocent, like you'll prevail, justice, justice will happen, the innocent will win, and right is right and wrong is wrong. And, that's not the case at all. And it's just a terrible, terrible lesson to learn when you do learn it the hard way. But I just can't believe that there is no accountability. It's very sad. And, it's going to take years to undo this mistake. And, it's a tragedy because now there are two victims. All of this to try to bring justice to a family that deserves justice, but they got the wrong guy. So now there's two victims and two families that are without their loved ones, and it's terrible. So.
And then also the person that actually committed the crime is not even,
also evading accountability. Everyone's evading accountability, and it's frustrating.
It's very frustrating.
I'm sick of it. Yeah.
And I mean that just goes to show that instead of innocent and proven guilty, my thing is you're guilty until you're proven innocent.
Oh, 100%.
Nobody's ever innocent. I love that saying that they use. But in America, that's not, you are guilty until you prove yourself innocent.
100%.
It's annoying because it's so easy to give a conviction out, but then it's so hard to overturn a conviction and get your justice. I mean, look at some people who have spent 30 and 40 years before they actually found somebody that believed in their story and was like, hey, I really want to advocate for you. And you just see this more and more. I mean, you're literally taking somebody's life and putting them in a box for however many years that they can't never get back. Like, they can't never get those years back. People's families die off. People's kids grow up. Some kids pass away before their own parents. And you're missing out on all these milestones for a crime that you didn't commit. And then it takes so long for you to get your justice,
It's so sad. I made a post one time for his social media. It's like, my husband's trial, if you take away Monday, which was, the whole day was jury selection. My husband's trial was 2 days and 2 hours. A first-degree murder trial. 2 days and 2 hours on Thursday before we broke for recess and then deliberations. And he's been in jail over, 5 years now. And it will probably be several more before he can come home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My husband's case happened in 2015. He got convicted in 2017. He didn't even get a trial. The lawyer would not go to trial. It was like, I'd rather for you to sign this plea deal and come home than not to come home. So in his mind, he was already saying, okay, where are you going to get found guilty? And that's why I did a very good podcast with an attorney from Tennessee about a month or two ago. And she was saying that a lot of attorneys, your attorney specifically, already believes that you're guilty. Like, they have a notion in their mind that you're guilty instead of really looking at it from a wide lens. Like, I'm here to defend this person. They're innocent until they're proven guilty, technically. But there is a lot of that goes on, that the person that's supposed to be fighting for you, advocating for you, and know the law more than you do, doesn't really believe in your innocence. And by us not knowing the law, I think that hinders a lot of us. And I think law should be taught in schools. I think it should be taught in high schools, because I think we should know these things. Because technically, the lawyer is just there to assist and speak, the legal jargon that we don't know because we're layman people and, we're just everyday people. We don't go to law school and sit there and read law books every day. And I think it's important now for everybody to know the law, because you never know when you're going to get caught up in the system, and the system is not there. I'm not saying all lawyers are like that, but a lot of lawyers just look at people like numbers. They're going home at the end of the day. The person that's the defendant 9 times out of 10 isn't going home. And I've seen some people that have represented themselves as been found not guilty. So it just goes to show you that it's important to know the law, especially now in these days.
For sure. And vet these attorneys. That's a mistake we made, just trying to hire someone quickly, not knowing. And now, for post-conviction, we have certainly made time to research our attorney, and we've hired somebody that, we're very comfortable with and that I feel is going to do a great job. So it's like, don't be scared to ask the hard questions. Have those free consults, or, meet with them before hiring them, and have them present you with some specifics. What specifically do you plan to do? And if you don't like the answers, move on to the next, right? So very important.
Very important. So you're here speaking for Rashawn today, and what would he want the people to know?
Yeah, so I am speaking for him. You probably would wish he was on the podcast because he's a much more fun guy than me. But
Okay.
no, I mean, he's been my light through this. And that almost makes me feel bad because I should be the one uplifting him and, strong for him. And it's like you can't break that man. He just wants everyone to know that he's still alive and he's still kicking, but he will never stop fighting. Neither one of us will. I made him a promise even before trial that, I'm going to see this through with you and we're going to get you home no matter how long it takes. And I remember he called me after his trial a couple days later once he got to prison, and it just was heartbreaking. He's like, I'm surprised you picked up the phone. Like, I'm surprised you even want to talk to me. And that broke my heart because it's like, he already expected everyone to turn their back because of the sentence. I mean, it's life. That's essentially a death sentence. There's no parole in North Carolina. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I didn't give a time limit on how long I would fight for you. But he's just, the first 2 years are very tough for us. It does get easier, which is a sad truth because, he shouldn't be in that situation at all. But he's taking the time to mentor other guys. He's made such a positive impact on so many lives. I mean, he quickly got to a medium camp, obviously staying out of trouble. He's held a job at every facility he's been at. He's taken classes, he's programmed. So just trying to stay busy. He's trying to get into school, which I know they usually cater to people that are coming home because, they want them to use the degree. But we're very hopeful there. He's making some positive strides. So just trying to make the best out of the situation. We tell each other all the time that this is happening for a reason. And even though we don't understand it and we certainly don't agree with it, there's a bigger plan. There's a bigger, plan in motion, and maybe you're supposed to be a blessing for other people. Mm-hmm. I get messages on his page all the time from guys that are released that are just checking up on him, and they're like, he really helped me, or tell him thank you, tell him I got this job, tell him, this, tell him that. And it's just, him doing what he can do behind there, me doing what I can do out here, just trying to help people that aren't as fortunate as us. So we're hopeful.
Yeah, and that's what I tell my husband all the time. Things happen for a reason. We don't never understand it, probably never will. Yeah. But we just have to take it one day at a time and keep following the path because, at the end of the day, two wrongs don't make a right, and justice will prevail, whether it's, you coming home after your time is ended, or, the fact that, we've helped so many people. We have a nonprofit as well, as you've seen. Just trying to help kids stay away from the system because we know how hard the system is, and mentoring kids. And, sometimes you're set down for reasons you might not understand it, but you have to take that with stride and, just keep pushing forward. And I think that that's, really important that we all keep pushing forward in a situation like this. It's unfortunate, but you can find some good in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I listened to this other podcast, and I couldn't even tell you what it was called, but it was just an inspirational one and a religious podcast. And the lady was like, I heard something the other day that really struck home with me, that discontent with God's decree is a sin. So if you're unhappy with the way that things are playing out or the way things are, that's really a sin because you're exactly where you're supposed to be and things are happening exactly as they should. Doesn't make it any easier, but it does give hope. So,
and I've always, our grandma always used to say that God gives his hardest and biggest battles to his strongest soldiers. So
I've heard that one too. Yeah,
that's what keeps me going.
I thought about getting that tattooed. Yeah,
keeps me going. So what kind of accountability or change do you think North Carolina court system or just North Carolina in general needs? Because we see that this is a problem. We have so many people on our podcast that have been wrongfully convicted or overcharged.
Yeah. I mean, that's just such a deep question, and it's so hard to pinpoint one thing. I mean, looking back on our situation, I think that jobs were not done the way that they should be. So at minimum, the jobs need to be done the way that they're supposed to be, right? If your job is to review a case and to make a decision based on facts, and you're not doing any of that, and you're spitting things that are not facts into, your opinions, it doesn't give much hope. So I don't think there's any accountability right now, but I think that a lot needs to change in the system as a whole. And I just feel fearful for, the next few years that's going to be an even tougher battle than it should be, because there's no accountability and people make up their own rules. So I think that at minimum, laws need to be abided by and people need to do their jobs. And that's me saying that kindly.
Yeah, I agree. I just hate that politics intersects the criminal justice system head on.
Yeah.
Because a lot of prosecutors, it's about convictions for them. So when election time does come up, they can say, hey, well, I have this many convictions. I put these many amount of criminals away, as they would say. And I don't think it's about true justice or healing for either side. And that's why I really study deeply into restorative justice, which is a Native Indian thing that they've done for years on their tribe. It's not just about justice. True justice is healing and making you understand the person that committed the crime, if they did commit the crime, why they did it, and what they were going through. And then it helps the family understand, because I've heard families say, that they still don't feel like they got justice. Their loved one's not here. They don't have answers, and by you saying, oh, well, you gave such and such life, does not close that gaping wound that they're feeling from a loss of a loved one. And so I think that's why restorative justice is extremely important. When you do have solid evidence that somebody committed a crime. And I think that it's important for us as a community, which we are a jury of our peers, to really understand that the state is not, I guess, set in stone solid. I think we've always been conformed that, everything that we hear from the state is concrete facts, evidence, and that's not true. We've seen a lot of, things, like I said, with trials being televised, you see a lot that you normally wouldn't see maybe 10 or 15 years ago when they really wasn't televised. See that everything is not concrete that the state says. And so I just think it's, a part of the community doing better about understanding both sides, whether you're,
sorry,
you're fine. Whether you are in the system, whether you have, a loved one, or not even in the system, because a lot of people don't understand until they come in contact with the system what we go through and what we see, you know what I mean? And so I think that's important as part of the community. And so that's why I try to educate and advocate and inform. I know one thing that really truly worked. There was a guy in Warren County that was being convicted of a first-degree capital murder, felony murder, and I went to all of his court dates. Spoke with the media because his attorney couldn't speak with the media, but his attorney's like, I know he didn't do this. Like, there's no evidence pointing that he did this.
Yeah.
It wasn't. It was just padded up evidence and a witness or a co-defendant that claimed he was there, but he wasn't there. And I think, my presence, and we did a press conference with the family and just let them humanize him as a person. Like, all they talked about who he was as a father, as a person. I think that really helped because he was found not guilty on capital murder.
Oh, wow.
Took him back for second-degree murder, but they gave him a plea deal that he couldn't really deny. I mean, it was like 14 years. He'd already done 6. So he has like 9 years to do. And if he had been convicted of second-degree murder, it would have been probably close to life, or 30 or 40 years plus 20. So I think it's important that we as community go and sit in these courtrooms when trials are going on and look at the evidence and call it out. Like, I mean, we can call it out because we're the community. We're not, we're not a lawyer. We don't have a gag order, so we can call it out. And then just humanizing the person so that people see that this is a true person. And sometimes you have to take a second look. So, I think that's important. So the next question I have is, have any organizations or advocates or public figures stepped up to help, or has it just been all you and his family?
So it's mostly me. I mean, I feel like we're still, and I know, he was convicted 3 years ago now. It's like time really flies, but, we're still in the early stages. The appeal was just denied less than a year ago. And then, filing to the North Carolina Supreme Court took several months. Now we're filing to the United States Supreme Court. That can take several more months. So we're still in this appeals process. We haven't even really started, which of course we've started, on our end, the investigation for post-conviction, but there's been nothing filed there. So it's still pretty early on. So I'm just really trying to get the word out. Like I said, I have that petition on change.org for my husband. We have the social media pages, more active on the Instagram, but there's Facebook, there's TikTok, just really trying to get his story out. And it's like you just said, he's a person, he's a human. And it's like when you see the charge to a stranger that doesn't know him, you immediately think something of him. You make an assumption based on what you see, and he's not that person at all. And we're not going to dim his light because of this wrongful conviction. We want everyone to see the type of person he is. So just being active and posting. I've gone to, like you said, I've gone to a couple of court dates for people that I've met through this process, for people that are fighting for their innocence, gone to a couple of rallies at the state capitol, marches. So just trying to network and to meet people in this community, because sadly it impacts way more people than it should. And then I never anticipated that there were this many people impacted, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Not good.
Once you are in the system with a loved one, then you see, because I didn't know either. I knew nothing. I was far away removed until I reconnected with my husband, of how many people are in the same situation with basically the same charges and are innocent. And it's mind-blowing, and it's scary at the same time. You know what I mean?
Very scary for sure.
So what can we do, or our audience is nationwide. What can we do to help, raise more awareness and support for Rashawn's case?
Yeah, so first of all, just listening. Great. Thank you for hearing our story and listening in. But signing his petition, it's change.org. His name, Rashawn, Rashawn Grant. Our social medias, everything's the same name, Justice for Rashawn Grant. If you go to his Instagram, there's a link tree where you can see all of his different social media accounts. The petition, of course, you can sign that, you can follow him, you can, share his story. We'll post updates up there, but just, the support, it means a lot to him, because, this whole situation, not just for him, but for everybody that's incarcerated, that's meant to dim you as a person, to dim your light, to change who you are. And essentially, you become a nobody while you're in there. You get forgotten by people, you become a number. And, I feel like my job as his wife is to make sure that he never loses all of those good qualities that he has, because he's an amazing person and he didn't deserve this. So, just support him that way. Give us a like when we post something, sign his petition, share his story. And of course, we'll keep everyone updated. The fight is far from over, and we luckily are blessed enough and have the means to continue fighting as long as it takes.
And what I'll do is I will tag all of his information in the description, so that anybody that's listening would like to go support and share, because it's important. That's the only way. You got to have a village behind you to get anywhere. So we'll definitely share his information. If you could speak directly to all the parties involved in this situation, or the system that failed you, what would you say?
So I'm glad you're asking me this now and not, 3 years ago. It might have been a different message, but just on a serious note, you took a husband, a son, a father, an uncle, a brother, a friend, a member of his community, a tax-paying citizen, a man with no criminal background, and, you locked him up for the rest of his life. So it's heartbreaking, and I just hope that, he's not just another number to everyone. I don't want him to become that to these elected officials. I want them to know exactly who they took away, and I want them to know that this is wrong, and we will prove that it was wrong. It's just, you created another victim. So you're in a position of power to keep the community safe and make sure justice is happening and, protect and serve. And you didn't do any of that in my husband's case. Essentially sentencing him to die. The system is the murderer because my husband did not do anything. And now there's also a very poor family that lost someone that does not have justice. And they will continue to hurt because we will continue to keep this case open as long as it takes. And sadly, it's going to affect them. They were sold a dream that my husband did this, and that's what they're going with. And, they think case closed. And the more we do, I'm sure the more it affects them because they want this to be behind them, but it never will be because we will continue fighting.
And I think that, that's just a sentiment when we say that we are protecting and serving. We're about public safety. We're about justice. Those are just sayings to me. There's no true meaning behind any of those because we do neither of those. Neither one of those things America has done. And, like I said, it's up to us as community members to change that. Because if we always walk in the light of what they tell us or what they've told us for years upon years, then there will never be a change in this system. And you see other states, you see other countries that, I think Norway, I don't even think they have the death penalty. They don't have murder cases. I think we're the only ones that have that in America, especially the felony murder rule. And we have to think about other ways to keep the community safe, like giving resources to the community and making sure that the person that committed the crime is the person that you're actually going after, not just somebody because they look like the person that you may think, is the person that committed the crime. So one last thing before, we end it. What is one message you want people to take away from your story and his story today?
Don't be naive. This can happen to literally anyone, including you. Hopefully it doesn't, but there are way too many people out there that are, wrongfully convicted, or they have a harsher sentence than was appropriate, or, they're just stuck in this loop of in and out of prison because they're not getting the resources that they need. So don't be naive. And don't be quick to pass judgment on people until you know the facts or you ask questions and genuinely care to learn, because there's a lot to learn. And we've learned a lot in the last few years. And I'm very embarrassed to say that we were naive. And the biggest lesson, vet your attorneys, please. Do not hire them until you know what you're getting into, because they are the ones that are fighting for you. They have to believe in it, and they have to be passionate enough to at least, at the bare minimum, do their job correctly. So please vet these attorneys.
I think that's very important. Well, thank you so much, Elisa, for this very insightful conversation that so many suffer from. And we just have to keep it going. We have to, let this platform be a voice and support one another while we're going through this, whether you're in it or not. I think you still should support people that are going through it, because it could be you any day. It could be one of your children, your grandson, your husband. You just never know. And so that's why we have to continue to come together and make a change, a true change for everybody, and for us to be truly safe, because I think that's the only way we will be safe.
Yep, for sure. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And thank you again, Blacklight. And here's another episode, and I hope you enjoyed.